Shalom, I'm Steve Linde. Welcome to the JNS studios and a special welcome to Gol Kalev, the author of the much acclaimed book, The Assault on Judaism.
Great to be here.
And in the book, actually on the front cover, you talk about the existential threat is coming from the West. And that seems to be more and more the case, especially after October 7th. Let's talk about that first.
Absolutely. So first of all, again, thank you for having me on your show. You guys are doing amazing work here. Look, I mean, for over a decade in the Judaism 3.0 think tank and in my previous books and my articles, we've been arguing that while Iran and its proxies have the ability to kill many Jews, they don't have the ability to destroy Judaism. In every generation, as we know, somebody rises up to eradicate Judaism. Sometimes it's done through a physical assault and sometimes through an ideological assault. And what we've seen over the last decade, and especially since October 7th, is that we're in the middle of a very fast-moving attempt to negate the idea of the Jewish state and through it to negate the idea of Judaism. And what I show in my book and briefings is that how that is also a proxy for an assault on Americanism.
So, you know that in just a couple of weeks, in June, Saudi Arabia and France are hosting a meeting at the United Nations, apparently to push for a Palestinian state. What's your view on that?
I think the overall, there is, when the whole idea of Palestinian state or the Palestinian national movement is a Western idea. It's not an organic Palestinian idea. People tend to forget that we used to have an organic two-state solution here in 1920. We had peace here. We had a Jewish state in the making that was ushered in through the British mandate, living side by side next to an Arab Hashemite kingdom in Syria, and which was pro-Zionists. They lobbied for the establishment of the Jewish state. What happened was that Europe wrecked it. France demanded Syria for itself, invaded, deposed the king. Britain had to carve out Palestine, give the east bank of the Jordan River to the deposed Hashemite kings. And then Britain decided they want Palestine for themselves. I spoke to the granddaughter of Lloyd George, who was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom at the time, Margaret McMillan, who's the renowned historian. And she told me, they never really, thought that their job is, they knew their mandate is to usher in a Jewish homeland, but they viewed Palestine as a colony. And what do you do when you have a colony? You incite one group against the other. So they promoted the idea of Palestinianism. They created a flag. Mark Sykes, the guy from Sykes-Picot, created a flag that is used until today and launched what became later the Palestinian National Movement. It was then used by Europeans for various purposes. So I think what we're seeing now, after decades of trying to cultivate the Western idea of Palestinianism, we're seeing a shift from an obsessive focus on Palestinian national rights to a focus on Palestinian human rights as humans. And we're seeing that very clearly in Gaza, because when there's a war, humans want to flee. And that's been the case in Libya, that's been the case in Iraq, that's been the case in Israel, in northern Israel and southern Israel. The only people that for some reason are not allowed to flee their homes are the people in Gaza. And that's because Europe and its proxies and part of the West is obsessed with this idea of Palestinian national rights, and we know why they're doing this. It's not because they care about Palestinians, and they're dehumanizing Palestinians in doing that. Only last week, or 2 weeks ago, the United Kingdom, as part of a basically anti-Israeli decree, they've demanded that the Palestinians stays in their home. They wanted to sanction Israel, sanction Israelis, supposedly to placate angry European masses that are protesting. So one of the reasons they're sanctioning Israel is because they're allowing Palestinians to leave their demolished homes and move to humanitarian zones. The British made it clear they want Palestinians to stay in their demolished homes as human shields for Hamas. Why? Because they're needed to promote this Western idea of Palestinianism. I think what President Trump is doing and others are getting, and including in the Arab world, are creating this understanding that Palestinians are human. They're not just a toy of Europe in its assault on Judaism. They deserve a better future, and that includes the right to leave the demolished demolition site and to build a better life elsewhere.
Here we are, almost 20 months after October 7th into this war. And I was wondering what you think of the war and how it can progress from here.
Well, the war is really, we're facing a dual war, a dual challenge. One is a physical war by Iran and its proxies, and the other is the ideological war that is coming from the West. And as we spoke, the second part is the first part is the part where sadly can lead to the death and carnage of many, many individual Jews. But the ideological war from the West, they attempt to negate this whole idea of Judaism, is the more lethal one when it comes to survival of Judaism, and has become, as I explained in the book, a national security threat to the United States. As far as the war, we always say it's hard to be an atheist when you live in Israel. I mean, so many miracles, and we've seen so many in this war, because what we have after October 7th, what started as a travesty, as something that could be, we only later realized that, the Hamas terrorists were advancing. They could have been in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem. They could have made it all the way to Judea and Samaria and be joined by Palestinian forces there. There was a miracle that they didn't go through that, but then all the other miracles that we all know about with Hezbollah, with Syria, with Iran. So I think Israel is in a radically better strategic position today than it was on October 6th. And that is true certainly militarily. That's also true, when it comes to be politically and ideologically, for one reason only, and it is the election of President Trump. President Trump being in office ended the sort of sanctioning Jews programs that Biden had, sanctioning military units in the middle of battle that Biden had, and we still have this opposition from Europe that was expressed to the UK sanctions and things along those lines. The physical assault on Judaism and the ideological assault on Judaism is autonomous, but they feed off each other. War crimes indictments need a war. So the ICC could have not have attacked the Jewish state and threw it as a proxy to attack in America had there not been the physical war. And the masses in Europe could not have done so had there not been a war. So those are autonomous assaults, but they feed off each other. And as we know, Hamas is dependent on the incitement in the Western media and the West against Israel in order for Israel to stop its operation.
Let's focus on President Trump for a minute. How do you see his policy on Israel and the Middle East, and also his plan for Gaza?
Well, I think first of all, there needs to be the number one thing before even you get to is President Trump good and bad and what does he do? The important thing is that he has fresh thinking. He's bringing fresh thinking. He said it. The definition of insanity is trying to do the same things again and again and again and hope it works. And the big secret is that people don't want it to work. The two-state solution is not a template for peace. It's a template to perpetuate war. And, we know that because I have friends in the conflict industry. There's something you say, like horizon towards peace. The two-state solution is a form of Islamophobia, is anti-Palestinianism, because for years and years and years, the West have indoctrinated the Palestinians that, one day or sooner or later, you'll go back to Tel Aviv. The reason you're in Gaza, over the majority of the people in Gaza are 1948 refugees. They're in Gaza because they, per narrative, got thrown out of Tel Aviv, of Herzliya, of other places in Israel, and one day they're going to be relocated back. All of a sudden, now you're telling them, starting with the Oslo Accords and over the last couple of decades, oh, by the way, it's not from the river to the sea, it's from the river to the Green Line. The Green Line is not a Palestinian concept. It's not in the Quran. It's a Western concept. It's a Western colonialist concept. So this notion of instead of from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. We're going to have this two-state solution thing, and it's going to be from the Jordan to the Green Line. The West Bank will be free. The West Bank is also a new term. So the two-state solution and other templates that are meant to divide the baby, to take the zero-sum game, take something and divide it. Something that's not dividable is not organic. It's against the nature, and rightfully so, of the Palestinians and against of the Israelis as well. So that was a format to continue to oppose the Jewish state, the two-state solution was not a template for peace, and neither was Land for Peace. What President Trump is doing is shifting from this divide the baby framework to win-win frameworks like the Abraham Accords, where everybody benefits. So I think, I don't know, but I would imagine we're going to see more ideas from President Trump that are in the realm of how does everybody can benefit? Because if you think about it, there's no reason. This conflict, there are real conflicts over the world, around the world, but this conflict, it has been conflicticized to the tunes of, billions of euros. The European Islam conflict is a real conflict. The Spanish Catalonian conflict is a real conflict. The French Corsican conflict, it's hard to solve. But here it's been, there is all kinds of ways in which everybody can benefit, including in just kind of looking at, the notion that, everybody's, if you look at the totality of the Middle East, of the map of the Middle East, everybody's concentrated around a little strip of land by the Mediterranean Sea. We didn't have in the Middle East a process you had in the United States, the go west, of blooming the desert. So I think I would imagine that President Trump and his advisors would look at ways in which you can have everybody in the Middle East benefit, maybe using Israeli technologies to bloom the desert, understanding that the threat is no longer, between, Jordan and Saudi Arabia and Israel, but really coming from the east and the north, and having creative ideas that can benefit everybody, as opposed to legacy European colonialist frameworks like the two-state solutions that just perpetuate war.
Let's just shift for a bit to the situation of diaspora Jewry and anti-Semitism in the world. You argue in this book and the one before that anti-Zionism is the new anti-Semitism, and we're seeing more and more of it. Most recently in Boulder, Colorado, but there are just a plethora of examples all over the world. How do you see this developing, and what do you think is the best way to combat it?
So I think starting in 2012 when we started the Judaism 3.0 think tank, and you mentioned the book Judaism 3.0, we said Judaism is going through a transformation, and Zionism is becoming the anchor of Judaism. Whether we like it or not, Jews and non-Jews relate to Judaism through Israel, in the positive or in the negative, and a lot in the negative. And age-old opposition is being funneled through Israel. That's expected. That's very similar to what happened throughout history. Theodor Herzl, in his time, there was a view that Jew hatred is over because it used to be funneled through religious mechanisms, and now Europe is secular. He recognized that once there is that's just the way that you get a distinction with the way that the hate is dressed and expressed to the core of the hate. He realized that European opposition to Judaism is permanent, and sure enough, at his time, there was a new thing called anti-Semitism, a secular form of hatred towards the Jews because they're successful, because of the way they look. And there was a debate, is anti-Semitism a form of Jew hatred or not? That was a debate of the late 19th century. Very similar to the debate that we had over the last few decades, is anti-Zionism Jew hatred, or is just a political view? Look, we've I think long past this. We had a discussion, as it so happened, in September of 2023, a few weeks before October 7th, in the Begin Center, a Judaism 3.0 think tank discussion about the path to eradicate Judaism, about the idea that we're in the middle of a large-scale assault from the West, trying to negate the idea of the Jewish state and through the idea of Judaism. And at that time, some people thought it seemed ridiculous, the idea that, ICC and European countries are going to start issuing indictments against soldiers, there's going to be demoralization, there's going to be trying to get the Jews themselves to recognize that they don't want to be Jewish. And sure enough, after October 7th, some people said, oh, don't worry about it. Now the whole world is behind you. And they were behind us for about a day or two, and then realized how they can leverage that to further the attack. So we're in an environment where we have to recognize Europe and European proxies are not going to accept the notion of a Jewish state ever. That's what Theodor Herzl understood. They're never going to accept the notion that accept Judaism, and that's what we're seeing again and again and again. Europe is also not going to accept the swift shift of power from Europe to America. Let's not forget that for 2,000 years, Europe was the world, was the Western world. They controlled the seas. They controlled, they had the global GDP, to use our contemporary terms. and all of a sudden after World War I, there was a shift to one of their colonies, to America, they're not going to accept that. So, we have to look at the of anti-Semitism, at the assault on Judaism in totality, in a strategic way, in the context of global developments. One of them is the 2,300-year-old European opposition to Judaism that is not going to go. It's just going to evolve, starting when they came here, the Greeks came here and invaded Judea. And the other is this Europeanism versus Americanism divide, that Europe is not going to accept America as the global power, that they're going to use Israel as a proxy assault against Americanism. We've seen that in the ICC, for example. We've seen it now with the UK sanction decree. And we also have to understand that what's happening in Europe has an effect. I have a whole chapter in my previous book, Judaism 3.0, about how trends in Europe affect the state of Judaism. And we have a very worrisome situation in Europe, basically what's brewing to be the war of European succession, which I hope we can avoid. But if you look at history, history is unpredictable. We can't use history to predict the future, except maybe one thing, that in every century, Europe finds some bizarre excuse to go to war that nobody thought about a few years prior. Like, how did World War I happen? Nobody, like in May of 1914, the idea of war in Europe was ridiculous. Nobody thought there was going to be a war. And still, why was, we don't know why World War I happened 100 years prior with the French, invasion of Europe. So, you have, three forces in Europe, the sort of integrationist, the United States of Europe people, you have the nationalists, and you have the Muslims. And these are three groups that don't talk to each other and pretty much detest each other. And that also has a direct impact about what's going on and how, the relationship to, our war here. As I mentioned, I'm friends with people in the conflict industry, people that work in the EU and the UN. And, they acknowledge what we said earlier about a two-state solution. They know it's not real. But there was a joke that the two-state solution here is just a laboratory, for a model to be applied in Europe in the future. That, in a typical European way, we're going to use the Israelis and Palestinians. Let's try to cultivate a two-state solution idea here and maybe one day deploy it in Europe. And people were kind of joking about that. I don't know if that's a joke anymore. But somebody told me the other day, why would the Muslims agree to that? So you have a situation in Europe that and again, what do the Europeans do? There's over 6,000 acts of anti-Muslim violence in the UK. What did the UK do in response? Sanction an 80-year-old Jewish grandmother. Now, there's not the causalities. I'm kind of taking liberalism with the arrows here, but that's the British says, well, there's violence against there's violence in the settlers, violence in the West Bank. Well, the settler violence and the violence by settlers in the West Bank is a fraction relative to the anti-Muslim violence in the UK. But I'm saying all of this. I'm throwing all of this in because to say that, number one, we have to understand that the assault on Judaism is here to stay. It is coming from Europe and its proxies. It needs to be understood in the context of domestic developments in those countries and in global developments, and needs to be countered through creative solutions that I offer in my book, not just focusing on hasbara and PR and tit for tat. The BBC said this, the BBC. We have to understand that this is a strategic attempt to end Judaism, which is a proxy assault on Americanism, and we need to defend against it strategically.
Well, let's just talk about one of those creative solutions that you mentioned in the book and how it can be employed.
Well, the first of all is to understand that the path of destruction has, in my view, two main stops. One is the hardcore Israel bashers, which are the what we call the pro-Palestinian, the face of the movement, this is we have to let them understand that what they're engaging in is white colonialism, even down to wearing a kafia. Palestinians do not wear kafias. They say, like, imagine like you want to support African American rights and paint your face black. But then down to more serious stuff, such as making sure that the Gazans stay in their demolished homes for their own sake, or making sure that Palestinians in the West Bank, to use the terminology, don't have access to Jewish employers. Like in SodaStream, for example. Make sure that we close places that employ Palestinians for their own good. So you have there is, as I talk in the book, ways to make to soften the hardcore aspect of the Israel bashing movement by making themselves recognize that they are really doing, engaging in colonialism. But those people don't have the power, don't have the destruction mechanisms. The people who do are what I call the Israel bashers light. And these are people in government, our friends, my friends, who are affected by this. And we saw that in the UK. I don't think the UK Foreign Office, when they start spreading this modern day blood libels about Israelis' actions in Gaza, and settlers' violence, and they're not organic anti-Semites, but they're trying to placate those hardcore Israel bashers. And they can do that as long as they have the illusion that we're still in Judaism 2.0, meaning that Judaism is merely a religion. So they can say, I love the Jews, I'm just against what the Jewish state is doing. Once there's a broad global recognition that we're in Judaism 3.0, that Judaism is transformed, and Zionism is the anchor of Judaism, or to say more simplistically, that Zionism and Judaism are almost synonymous, as sooner or later it will be, then you cannot hide behind this facade. And because those people in government, in media, are normative people that want to have normative friends and are fearful of being perceived as bigoted anti-Semites, as haters, once they understand that when they say the Jewish state is a pariah opposed by the rest of the world is the exact same thing as saying the Jews are a pariah opposed by the rest of the world, then the potency of the attack will be reduced. The attack will stay. We need to think in terms of conflict management, but we have to also understand that the assault on Judaism is here to stay. The number one thing that I tell people, both in interviews and briefings, is that just to like the old joke, the first step to a cure is understanding that you're sick. So the number one thing is to recognize that this is an assault that needs to have a strategic response in the same way that a physical assault has. And that hasn't happened yet. And I know it because, when I'm on book tour, a lot of people are telling me, this is a great book, but can you come back in 2026? Because right now there's a war in Gaza, there's hostages, Israelis are being killed. We have the physical war. Don't talk to me about the ideological war from the West. That's for next year or 2 years. That's not the case. It's going to be too late in a year or two. We got to address the assault on Judaism in a strategic way. So, I offer some frameworks, but if just getting people, other people can offer maybe better frameworks, but we need to understand and create this consciousness that there is an assault on Judaism, and we need to counter it in a strategic manner.
Herzl's answer, and I know you're the expert on Herzl, was to establish a Jewish state. What do you think Herzl would think of the situation today? I know maybe this is an unfair question, but what would he advise?
Well, first of all, Herzl recognized that the European opposition to Judaism is permanent and chronic and will not go away. He went against, his milieu that at the end of the 19th century said, what are you talking about? There is no Jew. This little anti-Semitism thing is not a big deal. And Jews like Herzl had friends who were anti-Semites. They said, we want to reform the Jews, but there's no more Jew hatred because Europe is now secular. So Herzl understood that opposition evolves. So first of all, I would hope, will understand that something like this needs to be addressed strategically. Herzl's solution was transformative, where it says we need to have a paradigm shift. We cannot just have committees against anti-Semitism that were formed at this time. We need to have something that's radical, and as you mentioned, that radical thing is a Jewish state, not because it will provide a refuge for the Jews. Having a Jewish state will accomplish will be a paradigm shift in two different ways. One is that it will change this the European Jewish dialogue conflict. It will create the right interface to address it. It's a conflict management thing. Some people think, Herzl thought he was going to end European anti-Semitism. He didn't. He wanted to manage it in a different way. And the other thing that he recognized is that once the Jews are emancipated from the European occupation of their mind with this notion that the persecution, the fearfulness of the Jew to do anything because the European is going to be there to reprimand him, to indict him for war crimes, to do whatever. Once we're going to be liberated, the Jews in a Jewish state will advance humanity to ways in which we cannot even imagine. And therefore, the existence of the Jewish state will be a European necessity. So it's not that the Europeans would love us, but they will need us. Herzl was a champion of what we call today peace through strength. Europe will need a Jewish state, and therefore the Jewish state will survive. And this is the situation we have today. So one of the solutions is what's happening right now. The more we innovate, the more we are the Tikkun Olam state, and that's why, in my view, Jews around the world that believe in Tikkun Olam should be, strengthen their Zionist identity, because just by affiliation, they are repairing, Tikkun Olam is repairing the world, Israel is repairing the world. So the Arab world recognizes this, and therefore is forming relationships with us through the Abraham Accords and other ways, and individually. But Europeans, as Herzl predicted, cannot. They will not. They will find ways of opposition, and sure enough, they do. There is, the shocking thing about the ICC is not just the ICC indictment, is that the next morning, France said that they will collaborate. There's an attempt to arrest Jews. We're going to do exactly what we did 80 years ago, and we will collaborate. And by the way, we need to, France and the UK need to, at one point or another, address their role in the Holocaust, and for their own good, because, if you don't address it, then you'll continue opposing Judaism as you do right now. But that's an aside, another conversation. But I think Herzl will understand that the way to address this European opposition is through a paradigm shift. And the paradigm shift that I offer is Judaism 3.0, is the recognition that Judaism transformed, that Zionism is the anchor of Judaism, basically taking advantage, which Herzl was very good. Herzl was very good at extracting asset components from liabilities. He understood the asset in anti-Semitism. He understood that, it pushes us together, it's obviously layered, and this was before the Holocaust. And we can extract the asset components out of anti-Semitism today, because all those people who have the ability to destroy us, in the Western media, in governments, they are fearful of being perceived as anti-Semites. They only do this because it says we are not anti-Semites. We're anti-Zionist, we are critical. Once there is a global recognition that we're in Judaism 3.0, that Zionism is the anchor of Judaism, they will be deterred. They'll be deterred from doing this. And that recognition is happening. And I know it because over the last 10 years, we've been having all those conversations and the panels and events, and I have my Judaism 3.0 column. And we've seen that, but we've seen it after October 7th. After October 7th, as somebody says, Judaism 3.0 turn from a theory to a depiction of day-to-day reality. You can ask any college student who is not even Jewish, but happen to have a Jewish last name, and walks into a college campus and is defined by his Jewish identity. Once there's we double down on this message that Judaism and Zionism is basically one and the same. Those people who want to get on the Senate floor and says that the Jews, just as Ayman and Hitler said, are a pariah opposed by the rest of the world, that the Jews, just like Wagner says, pollute humanity, that the Jews, just like French philosophers says, are occupying Europe, now they're occupying Palestine, they'll be deterred from doing that. Mm-hmm. So the paradigm shift that I discuss in those books is Judaism 3.0.
I have two more questions for you. One is, what is your message to diaspora Jewry at this time?
Well, the message, of course, is come to Israel, and some I hear that some diaspora Jewry that want to get a Parisian experience go on a summer vacation in France. Why would you do that? If you want to go to a French cafe, the best French cafes today are in Jerusalem. The French cafes that used to be in Paris are gone. And by the way, this is what Herzl also said. He understood that the best Munich beer is not consumed in Munich, but in ski resort in Switzerland, because that's where the audience are. So the message is that the message is that things are not well for you guys, and center, whether you like it or not, more and more of your identity is centered around Israel and Jerusalem. And for those of you who still oppose the idea that Judaism is transformed, that are still opposing basically Judaism, please stop.
And finally, are you hopeful about the future?
I am certainly hopeful about the future in Israel. I'm extraordinarily optimistic about Israel is coming out of this war so much stronger, including internally, contrary to popular perception. We have a very strong society, and we've seen it because there's a lot of money being poured in to try to make us hate each other, incite a civil war, all that kind of stuff, and it hasn't happened. I spend time with I have friends like everybody else on both sides of the internal debates in Israel, and it's not like you have in other countries. I'm very optimistic about Israel. I'm not optimistic about what's happening in Europe, which is basically committing suicide. Europe is committing suicide not only in the obvious ways, that people are talking about allowing the mass migration and all the other, domestic stuff they're doing, snubbing America, trying to pick a fight with America, sometimes using Israel as a proxy to pick a fight with America. I'm more worried because of the European fueling of neo-Palestine ideologies. And they're shooting themselves in the foot, to say it mildly, because when we spoke earlier about this danger of war of European succession, which I called for years, rather than have a war in Europe and then a peace conference, let's first have the peace conference to avoid the war. But Europeans, EU officials and others says the European mind will never allow it. There was no concessions here. The Muslims in Europe are very similar to the Palestinians in the regard that they're not, there wasn't an organic, I hope I'm not getting into trouble here, but most researchers agree that there wasn't an organic Muslim European modern identity. Yes, there were Muslims in Spain, and by the way, Spain, is now being viewed by the progressives as a settlement, as one big settlement, because the word reconquista, the idea that Spain, the people in Spain today kicked out the Muslims because 1,000 years prior there were white people in Spain, goes to waste if you're pro-Palestinians, because how can you cannot be anti-Zionist and pro-Spanish, because if you're anti-Zionist, you're sort of negating the idea that the Jews are coming back to their homelands where there's a established connection that nobody refutes. So you can't say the Spanish are coming back 500 years ago to their homeland because there was some loose connection to people that lived there 1,000 years. So Spain is a mess, because the whole raison d'etre to Spain is going to waste because of neo-Palestinian ideologies. And you have Muslims in Europe from various places that have no connection. Like, what's the connection of somebody from Pakistan to somebody from Morocco? Well, the connection is becoming European opposition. The occupation, if you want to call, of the notion of having a Muslim woman going to the beach and having 4 armed policemen coming and ordering her to take off her clothes or top in the name of secularism or something along those lines, which, by the way, creates a state of apartheid in France. If you're looking for a place where there's apartheid, that's France, because which Muslim, would want to go to the beach when is under a risk that armed French police are going to come over and what we call in the West, sexually assault you. And you cannot call the police because they are the police, and you cannot call the government because the government support it. So, so you have a de facto state of apartheid in France today, but that's another separate discussion. But there is the cultivation of neo-Palestinian ideologies. What is the uniting Muslim identity? Some people start calling it, Euroslam, the London Stan. It's becoming clear that it's Palestinian. It's under the Palestinian flag. We've, since October 7th, seeing a very aggressive Western attempt of de-Palestinization, meaning the Palestinian flag is less and less about individuals living in Palestine, and it's about burning Tesla cars, it's about burning national monuments in Washington, and it's about, Muslim rights in Europe, and it's no longer in the context of, intersectionality. Like it used to be, that says, okay, I'm going to, I want to fight for, African-American rights, Black Lives Matters and things like that. So I'm going to wave the Palestinian flag, and in exchange, they'll support my... We're gone. That's not like... When you saw, the images of people burning Tesla cars with a Palestinian flag, they probably did not even know what this flag represents. And what it represents now, more and more and more, is this, Palestinian, neo-Palestinian ideologies that are threatening the West. Is there going to be a two-state solution in Europe? Or why should there? Somebody says, why should the Muslims agree to a two-state solution in Europe? There's no, Europeans are not making babies. They don't have a narrative. They're post everything. So there is, but it's the EU through their budget that continues to fuel this ideology. And that's, so this is a very kind of convoluted way of saying, am I optimistic? And I said, I'm not optimistic about Europe. Europe has one hope, in my view, and that hope is being forced by President Trump to disengage completely by anything and everything that has to do with Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So now I'm told that all the what the Europeans are doing, sanctioning Israel, issuing the degrees, threatening to cancel halal flights, ICC, is to appease the masses, which is the same thing that, we had throughout the centuries. The masses were anti-Semites or we're going to appease them by throwing them a bone. If President Trump tells Europe, you are not allowed to fund organizations that incite Palestinian and European against Israel as they do now, you're not allowed to issue all those decrees, then the European governments can tell their people, we have no choice, we're out. We are focusing now on the threat from within Europe. So I'm not optimistic. I'm pessimistic about what's happening in Europe and how it's going to project towards Israel and the rest of the world, because I think the one of the biggest threat to global stability is coming from Europe, and they're not focused on that. But I'm optimistic that President Trump, as he enters an everything on the table dialogue with the Europeans, tariffs and NATO contribution and Greenland and Russia and Ukraine, and this is the time to issue this demand to get out, like all this ludicrousy, of EU money that is spent on Palestinians, trying to, and really inciting Palestinians against Israelis, fueling anti-Semitism through those NGOs, directly, indirectly. There's an opportunity for Europe to completely get out, and this will probably reduce the speed of the cultivation of neo-Palestinian ideologies in Europe. So even in pessimism, there's room for optimism. But overall, I'll tell you why I'm optimistic. Extremely optimistic, because if we have to summarize this conversation, is that in every generation someone rises to eradicate us. We know that from Passover. Sometimes it's a physical attempt, and sometimes, like now, it's an ideological attempt. But we also know that in every generation God saves us. We've seen that over the last 18 months, and we're a nation of believers. Israeli seculars and religious people are believers. Israelis protesters against the Bibi government are believers as well. And we all believe that God is there to save us. And, there's a clear line now between those who bless Israel and those who curse Israel. There's a lot of people who are cursing us, but also it's important to say, since we had a lot of pessimism, that we should be encouraged by all those wonderful people around the world, including in Europe, including the United States, and mostly in the Arab world, or many in the Arab world, that are blessing us, and we have to be grateful for them.
Gol Kalev, it's always a pleasure and interesting to talk to you. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.